Today we visit a beautiful off-the-beaten-path garden gem in the deep south that is truly stunning. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned as we garden smart in Alabama.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
Now more than ever, our homes are our havens, where we learn, love, and live. Let garden projects, inspired or simple, bring beauty and comfort to you. Wherever you choose to plant good, we're with you.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes it SUV.
Growing up in Georgia, the Southern Garden has entranced me my entire life. With each changing season, there's a new wave of wonders that reminds us of why we find ourselves continually drawn to the outdoors. There are a handful of standard bearers in the iconic Southern Garden, and Bellingrath Gardens is certainly one of them. The seeds of Bellingrath Gardens were planted in 1917 when Walter and Bessie Mae Bellingrath purchased a fishing camp on the Fowl River. Initially intended as a weekend getaway to allow Walter a reprieve from his busy job as owner of the Mobile, Alabama Coca-Cola bottling company, it slowly evolved as upgrades were made along the way, and inside of a decade, it began its transformation into a world-class garden. The Bellingraths traveled to Europe to visit the finest estate gardens, where they collected camellias and azaleas that became the backbone of their sprawling woodland garden. In 1932, Bellingrath Gardens opens to the public, and a year later, the permanent residence is built, cementing the family's tie to this little slice of heaven. Much has changed since then, but the heart and soul of Bellingrath has remained steadfast. Today we meet with the garden's executive director, Todd Lassane, a well-known plantsman that I met during my time as a horticulture student at UGA. Todd went on to earn his PhD from NC State, and since has become one of the leading experts in the field of horticulture. Today we tour this historic garden with him and get a glimpse into his vision for its future. Todd, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Eric. Really glad to have you here.
No doubt. It's been so long since you and I have touched base. I want to say, well, it's been a few years.
Great to see you again.
Indeed. Well, there's so much that's happened from then till now. I want you to tell us a little bit about your journey from UGA to now Bellingrath. What a great honor.
Well, you know, I was working on a master's degree at Georgia under Tim Smalley, and then I had the chance to undertake a scholarship to England for a year through the Garden Club of America and a counterpart organization in the UK at the time. And I decided I already wanted to do my PhD, and I was looking at NC State, North Carolina State University. And I got back from the England scholarship and was like, I love horticulture, but I love public gardens. And I ended up working at the campus arboretum there. Then after I finished the doctorate, I went to develop a small garden near Winston-Salem called Paul Senior. Then some folks in Tulsa heard about me, so I ended up starting the Tulsa Botanic Garden. And then 6 months ago, I came here to take this job. So I've kind of come back to the Gulf Coast because I'm from Southeast Louisiana.
Wow.
So it's weird how life treats you, but here I am.
Yeah, it's full circle.
And then you and I bump into each other after all this time too.
I know, crazy, crazy. Well, this is a wonderful garden. This is actually one that has been on our list to visit for years and years and years. And finally, we make it down here on a beautiful day. Yeah. The azaleas are in
beautiful,
wide open bloom.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see the garden. You've got so much to show, I'm sure. Todd, as we walk through the entrance of Bellingrath, one of the first gardens that we encounter is this classic formal rose garden.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this plant collection.
Absolutely. So this rose garden goes back to the 1930s. We have a rosarian who curates it. She's been with us for over 30 years. Her name is Linda Guy. And we have over 40 different kinds of hybrid tea roses that we have a great spring bloom out in late April, and because we prune them hard. We'll do another hard prune late in the summer and get another bloom out in the fall. But we also just have blooms throughout the year. It was laid out in the shape of the Rotary Club logo, Mr. Bellingrath. When he was working with the landscape architect, I think at one point kind of got fed up a little bit. So he dismissed the landscape architect, then he threw his pen on the ground and told his guys, make it like that. And it actually makes for a really great rose garden design because you have these segmented beds going around this beautiful fountain, which was gotten from one of the local malls when they didn't need it anymore, and beautifully reflects Mobille's history with this beautiful metal cast iron work all over town. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the roses you have here. Most of these look like hybrid tea roses.
They all are hybrid teas. I'm sure there's a couple of floribundas. We are trying to grow hybrid teas that will do well in this climate. We're
Right.
very humid. You can feel it today. Deep south, zone 9. And so it's just not an easy part of the country to grow roses, or at least to have roses that actually look good in the landscape. And so we're testing them here. We'll change 1 or 2 out a year, try to get a few that can last 3 or 4 years, and then get a really great bloom out.
So for the horticulture staff here, is this more of an evaluation garden?
It is. It's not an evaluation garden in the sense that we have every different rose you could ever imagine. We
Right.
don't. We have only 40 or maybe more. I should know better. We're not testing them to the point of let the ugly ones stay.
Right.
They
right,
really need to kind of perform at some level because this is a formal show garden.
No
So
doubt.
it's a little mix of both.
So every year, do you rotate in a certain number of new varieties?
Ideally, we'd rotate in several a year, as little as 1 and as high as maybe 4. And then, we'll buy them in from growers on the West Coast. They'll last for several years if you treat them right.
Right.
Actually, they'll last for many years if you abandon them in a cemetery or something like you often find the old roses. But here, under the regimen that we have them, we find we can get really great performance for a few years. After that, we can move on to another one.
Great. Okay, so you get a really nice spring bloom.
Yes.
And then a fall bloom, and of course, intermittently, on all sides of that.
Absolutely. Traditional treatment of roses here would be to cut them back in late winter, so that'd be February for us. We try to finish by Valentine's Day, actually. We're a little later this year. And then, of course, you'll get a great bloom out, which will be in April, usually late April for us. And then you'll kind of have them through the summer, and you're just deadheading them and keeping them, maintained. And then you'll cut them back hard again in late summer, like say September, and then you'll get another bloom out in October. And here they'll bloom all the way to Christmas, and for our
Wow.
Christmas light show, we had roses in bloom because we didn't get a hard freeze till after.
That's incredible.
I know.
Well, we've got to mark our calendars. We've got to make sure to come back and see
Yeah.
the roses.
Well, it's a lovely place.
We find ourselves now at the heart of Bellingrath Gardens, and it's just right, probably not 50 yards from the house. There's this beautiful formal water feature and actually a really elegant little stream that runs through this alley. It's just something from a fairy tale.
Yeah, I love this part of the garden. This is the runnel that leads to the Mermaid Fountain, and it's just a beautiful spot. It goes back to the when the home was built, so just immediately prior to the home. So this would have been built in the late 1920s, early 1930s. The gardens opened on April 7th, 1932 to the public. The home was built a few years after in 1935 and beyond. But what we've done, Eric, is when we were in the rose garden earlier, we walked, a couple of 100 yards to get here, and we passed one of the other features we call the Great Lawn. So it's about a 4-acre lawn that in Mr. Bell's days was persona non gratis. You did not walk on it. And it was a beautiful lawn. But what we do now is we use it for some events. So we recently had a beer and Beers and Blooms Festival.
Nice.
And we have a classic antique car show that is held, and we do a few other events. We're going to have an Easter egg hunt on it soon. And so it's just a multi-purpose space. We have a beautiful 400-foot long perennial border that follows one end of that lawn, and it's flanked by azaleas on all the other sides, which are lovely. And so you kind of get that feeling as you're walking there. Then you come to these beautiful water gardens near the home, and like you said, just a few yards away, you're around all the gardens around the home. There's the east terrace overlooking the Fowl River. There's the north terrace, which would have been the view that the Bellingraths would have seen from their bedroom windows. And then there's the south terrace immediately behind us, which is a more recent addition in the 1960s, because there used to be a lodge for the nieces and nephews. Prior to that, that was there, and then it was torn down. So what I love about this space is these beautiful oaks. Some of them are original, and you can see the curvilinear branches. We've had to replant more recently, of course, with hurricanes and all of that, but it's kind of more of a shady respite than some of the others, and you always have the sound of the water.
I love it. I'll tell you something that is really almost magical walking through this garden. Of course, we came at just the right time of the year because all these amazing azaleas are in full bloom. We've got these little winding trails that are flanked on either side with all of these beautiful azaleas that are in full bloom. And then it kind of opens up into the great lawn, and then it opens up into these areas. I think it's just a wonderful, like around every corner, there's this new like surprise.
Yeah, it's neat. The designers would call it a compress and release, I think is the term. Right. So you kind of force through almost a tunnel of azaleas, then you come out to the 4-acre lawn, and it's kind of like, wow. And then before you know it, you're back through another little tunnel of azaleas. Or if we were here in the winters, camellias. Right. Mr. Bell and Miss Bessie were huge camellia collectors. So, you know, we just have that nice rhythm of a kind of a constrained view and then a wide open view.
Wow, well, it's beautiful. As a horticulturalist, Todd, I do want you to spend a little bit of time talking about the plantings here, because they're wonderful. These are all done in-house. It's very traditional floriculture, which you know is kind of going by the wayside, but it's alive and well here, and you do a fantastic job with this. Let's talk about that.
Thank you, Eric. I've got a very, very talented greenhouse staff and director of horticulture and garden designer in-house who create all these. So we have in front of us, we have our own Easter lilies, which we forced. We have fuchsias that we have grown. You know, these are crops that only may last a little bit of time. Right. We have, you know, and of course in the fall we'd have chrysanthemums and later poinsettias. Right now we also have Flores hydrangeas. These are not the outdoor landscape hydrangeas. These are ones that you would grow in the greenhouse, and you could blue them or you could pink them by adding the right chemical. Exactly. Pot mums. We used to have pot azaleas, which is something I see in the historic photos, and I'd like to bring that back. So it's very period, all the way, I guess, 30s, 40s, 50s, to have seen this kind of horticulture, even into, obviously, to the 70s. But it's been kind of dying out since then, because it's a little more expensive to do it this way than just get some winter annual like a pansy that's going to last for months. But it's kind of a hallmark of us that we can still pull this off, and the public can see it.
One of the most majestic views probably in the state of Alabama is the grotto in front of the house. And we can't leave this part of the garden without talking about that. It's a very peaceful and yet grand place, standing there right on the edge of the river, and you can see why they picked this location.
Oh, it's beautiful. We're about 30 feet above the Fowl River, so we're on a big sand dome, basically. And so when they hired the architect, George Rogers, who was a very noted architect here in the Mobile area, to design the home, he also laid out these formal gardens, this obviously Italian-inspired runnel. And you can see that on the grotto. You can see there's other runnels. There's areas where the water will disappear. It actually runs under the house at one point, which I probably would not do today if I were designing it. But anyway, and then it reappears on the other side of the house. And all of this trickery, if you will, of how to use water play. Although we don't have dazzling jets like you'd find in Las Vegas, we have our own type of water features, and it all runs down to the Fowl River. And there's all this beautiful bluestone and flagstone. It's really, really nice.
It's incredible, and the stonework is very, very impressive. I want you to talk a little about the rockery, which is just around the corner from here. And as I walked through this garden for the first time, that was a little, like, I guess you could call it like a little pocket alley that blew my mind. It was so ingenious and like I said, it was once again like just a magical moment.
Well, so it's actually my favorite area. So on the one side of the garden you have the Fowl River, which we were just talking about, and on the other side, inland, if you will, you have what we call Mirror Lake. And so at one point there was an erosion rill that just ran down to the lake from this kind of high spot we're in. And then the architect, Mr. Rogers, came to Miss Bessie and said, well, clearly what we need here is a set of stairs going right down, very classical design. And she said, oh no, actually I would like to see something a little more curvilinear with maybe a water feature like some of these rockeries we saw in our travels in the 1920s to England and Europe. And he says, well, that's going to be much more expensive. And the story goes, and she said, now who's paying the bill, mind you? So it turned out to be a lovely space. And you're just enveloped by the stone. The plants are overflowing. I can't wait till we can get and put new little treasures that I know Miss Bessie would have had in her day that may have been shaded out over time. But just by some management coming through and then putting in some really cool plants, we're going to restore it to its glory.
As we make our way down the steps of the rockery, the garden opens up into this beautiful, wide open area. Yep. We see Mirror Lake here, which is aptly named. It's reflecting all these beautiful fuchsias and pinks, and the beautiful river birds that are growing on the banks of this area, and of course this amazing bridge that ties in the gardens around the house over to the other side of the lake.
This area has a different feel. It's more informal. In fact, the bridge is purposefully rustic. It's always been a rustic bridge here, so even when they rebuilt it 10 years ago, they did not do painted wood or any kind of metal. We kind of have this almost English landscape feel when you're looking around with the reflected colors, as you said. The walk on the west side of the lake behind us is shrub borders with trees. We have a lot of our older camellias are there, and we have some flowering magnolias. And it's very much of an informal setting, but it's lovely in its own way. And I think we can do some really cool things with shade perennials in the future there, which will be a lot of fun.
Good. You've got some bald cypress too, which is kind of a nod to the history of this part of the garden.
Yeah, this was a sawmill runoff pond when they were logging bald cypress from this area prior to the Bellingrath times. And we replanted some in bald cypress. This area was basically denuded in 1979 when Hurricane Frederick came through. It used to be what they call coastal hammock forest, so laurel oaks and live oaks and bald cypress and longleaf pine. And so now it's different, it's more open, but it's still equally beautiful.
Well, before we leave Bellingrath, there are a couple of other parts of the garden that I want us to talk about. There's this really, I think, amazing nature estuary, so it's kind of a vaulted walk.
Yeah.
We've got little bat homes along the way. Talk about that part.
Yeah, so we've had this boardwalk over the estuary for years and years now. It was originally founded by a grant from ExxonMobil, and it's just lovely. It's quite long. You'll get to see all kinds of the bird life and aquatic life that are here. You might even spot an alligator, and it just showcases the vegetation right at the shore. It's kind of a great counterpart to the planted style of the gardens, I guess, and people really enjoy it.
I know one of the projects that you've recently undertaken is the renovation of the Asian garden. It's a beautiful garden in its own right, but as is the case, oftentimes there are gardens that need a little more TLC. So talk about that process.
Well, a garden is never finished, right? Gardens are constantly evolving. Plants never stop growing. They never stop dying even. So we have to constantly look at the garden as we're shepherds. We're tending them. And so the Asian American garden was built in the 1960s after Mr. Bellingrath died. But it was built in an area that really, I think, fits that motif. And it has all kinds of interesting, a little tea house. We have a moon bridge. We have a pavilion that is aptly in honor of Coca-Cola in Japanese characters, right? And so it's actually a blend of Chinese and Japanese styles, but some of the pieces need a little bit of restoration. The sidewalks need a little bit of work. And that's some things we're going to do now because it's one of the most beloved spots in the overall, areas of Bellingrath Gardens. And we love it too, and we're going to keep it going.
One of the most impactful, iconic color displays here at Bellingrath Gardens are these wonderful azaleas. They're literally everywhere. And as you walk in through the gates here, it's one of the most inviting, grand entrances. And of course, it's this enormous explosion of color that lasts for what, maybe 3 weeks or so?
2 weeks, but yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So, and these are mostly the classic, indica hybrids that would have been part of the traditional southern garden.
Yes. Yes, so these azaleas were introduced probably more so into Charleston in the 1800s. They made their way to Mobile over time. It was, the local stories say that people saw them in Charleston, wanted to bring them here because they saw people having tourism there. Miss Bessie fell in love with azaleas, was known both pre-Depression and during the Great Depression to pay much higher than she should have prices as her way of supporting people. So she would go buy the azalea out their front yard for a larger than normal price. But what they were buying was these old-fashioned, well, by today's standards,
Right.
Southern Indica hybrid azaleas, you know, and they're still around, but they get big. Now you can cut them back to the ground; they don't care; they'll come back. They're almost indestructible. But what you see now in the azalea market is largely different plants. The dwarfer kinds that we call the Kurumi azaleas, or even the Satsuki azaleas, those were introduced decades after. These came from more like China, although they were also bred in Europe, and the Satsukis and the Kurumis came from Japan like in the 1930s. So we're really talking about these, and then now they're breeding them and breeding reblooming ones like the Encore azaleas. So there's all kinds of cool things happening in the azalea world, but we're one of the big show places for them.
Well, it's nice to come to a garden that does showcase these traditional, this is part of the history of this garden, these azaleas.
And the history of Mobile. We are known locally as the Azalea City.
Another plant that I want to talk about, or category of plants, you know, as we're thinking of enormous color displays, the Bellingrath is also known for, is the chrysanthemum.
Yes.
And these are all greenhouse grown mums, just like the many other greenhouse crops that are produced on the grounds here.
So there's two kinds. There's the florist pot mums that you would see at the grocery stores, and I call them the meatball mums because they're pruned or self-pruned to those shapes. And then we also grow what's called the Korean or the cascading mums, which are a much later introduction from Japan and the Korean peninsula of mums. Longwood Gardens is famous for their display. We have the U.S.'s largest outdoor cascading mum display. And we'll grow thousands of them. We'll grow them into pillars. We'll grow them where they'll train them to hang down from balconies. And it's like Technicolor. They tend to bloom later than the pot mums. So you'll get maybe chrysanthemums in, you know, the florist pot ones in September, October. These will bloom in late October through November. And it's just great. It's just an incredible show. And it takes a lot of craftsmanship to be able to train these to grow to these different shapes.
Wow, what a great way to usher in fall. Todd, Bellingrath is a very dynamic garden, and it of course has these deep roots in history, but then there's also a lot of potential for what this garden is going to be in the future, and a million reasons why visitors want to come back over and over again and see the progress that's going on here. I want you to talk a little bit about the future of Bellingrath. Where do you see this garden when we come back, you know, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years for another visit?
Well, sure. Thanks, Eric. I have a great passion for gardens, and I believe gardens are ever-changing, ever-evolving. They are not static. I mean, they grow every day, right? If you're trying to keep a garden the same, you're going to fail miserably, and Mother Nature will be the first one to let you know. I think when you're talking about a historic garden, it would be very difficult to truly maintain it exactly as for those reasons. So what you're really looking for is a timeless quality, right? It has to be at some level period, but also some level timeless to the founders. So our founders loved plants. They were collecting plants. And so if we choose to bring some new materials in their spirit, I think that's okay, as long as we're not wholesale changing it. The biggest problem, though, in it is maintaining it, because especially here in the Deep South, things just grow.
Right.
And so it's this renovation, you know, literally cutting those Southern Indica azaleas back to 6 inches tall when they've gone to 12 feet and maybe grown out of their space. But looking at an area and seeing, what was the kernel? What was the idea? And then what decade was it, that idea? Because even though the Bellingraths were here for about a 30-year period of time, Mr. Bellingrath outlived Mrs. Bellingrath, but still roughly 30 years. And well, that's still 30 years.
It's a long time.
I mean, new plants were being created. They got interested in camellias more so later than they became interested in azaleas. He became the gardener after she died, but he really had a passion for the garden because Miss Bessie died young in 1943, and he lived into his 80s. Wow. So there's just so many stories to tell, but we have to be very deliberate, very careful, very thoughtful about how we do it, but not be slave to it at the same time, and that's a delicate balance.
Todd, Bellingrath is truly a pleasure, and it's a treasure. And congratulations to you on your appointment here. And I can't wait to see how this garden grows and continues to mature.
Well, thank you, and it's great having you over
Thank
after
you
so
so
many
much.
years.
Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
Now more than ever, our homes are our havens, where we learn, love, and live. Let garden projects, inspired or simple, bring beauty and comfort to you. Wherever you choose to plant good, we're with you.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes it SUV.
What an amazing place. It was such a great treat catching up with Todd and spending a day at Bellingrath Gardens. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, even if you're a master gardener, there's always more to learn. So join us next week for more great gardening tips and ideas as we garden smart.